Hey everyone, welcome. Welcome to our webinar today, using JIRA for test case management. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jeff Perkins. I'm the CMO of QASymphony. We have over 3,500 people that registered for this webinar, which is super exciting. We're glad you're here. Now, before we start, I want to make a few technical points on this webinar. We're already getting some questions about audio. So I just want to point a couple things out to make the webinar experience as good as possible. The audio for this webinar comes through your computer. So there's no dial-in number. So just make sure you turn up your speakers or you use a set of headphones. Whatever method you want, it's going to come through your computer though. Again, no dial-in number for this webinar. If your audio quality is choppy, that would not be on our end. We are actually talking through a phone line, so our audio would be clear. If the audio is choppy, it could be your internet connection. So we recommend people, if it's choppy, to maybe relocate yourself to a place in your home or office that's closer to your internet access point. You can customize your webinar viewing experience. You are able to increase or decrease the size of the different widgets, increase the size of the slides. So please do that. You can minimize things you don't want to see on the screen, increase things you do want to see on the screen, and that's all up to you. When you got in the webinar, there is a survey that could have popped up. If it did pop up, just close that survey. There's a little minimize button. You should be able to minimize that, and it'll go into a little console at the bottom of the screen. And if you have any questions, whether it be technical or questions for the presenter, just submit them in the little widget on the left with questions, and we'll get to as many questions as we can, okay? So let's move on. Again, I told you in the beginning I'm with a company called QASymphony. If you have not heard of QASymphony, we make software testing tools for agile development teams. If you're interested in learning more about us or taking a free trial, please check out our website at QASymphony.com. I also want to tell you about a really cool upcoming webinar we have featuring our friend Joe Colantonio. Now you might know Joe from the Test Talks podcast, and Joe's doing a webinar on March 24th titled Creating Visibility and Speed with Automation and Test Management. That should be a great one. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, there's a resources widget in the upper right of your webinar console, and I put a link to it right there. So while you're watching this webinar, you can go in and just register for our next webinar without a problem. I also want to tell you about a really cool event we have coming up on April 13th in Atlanta. We're calling this event Quality Jam. It is a conference dedicated to software testing and software quality. We have some great speakers coming in like Scott Birkin, who is a best-selling author, Keith Klain, a software testing thought leader, Ian Culling from Version 1, who's the CIO there. So it's going to be a great event. If you're interested in attending that event, buy your tickets now. We have early bird pricing of $100. Price will double on March 15th. So if you're interested, definitely buy your tickets now. And for people in this webinar, you can use the code QASVIP when you're checking out, and we'll give you an extra 20 off. So you're taking that $100 price, it'll be about $80 to attend the conference. And what we're going to actually do, because we're so happy all of you attended the webinar, we're actually going to give away some complimentary passes. So for the first 5 people that email us to the email address qualitygym@qasymphony.com, we're going to give you a comp pass to the event. So if you know you're going and you're really excited about it, definitely send that email in as soon as you can. The first 5 emails will get the complimentary pass. Okay? Finally, before we move on to our speaker, a couple housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and it will be available on demand tomorrow. When it is available, you'll get an email from Ryan giving you the link. So just keep an eye out for that. You could share that with anyone. You can come back, watch the webinar again, but it will be available on demand. We encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter. We're using the hashtag JIRA testing. So, if you're into Twitter, please definitely let's get the conversation going outside the webinar. Again, use that Q&A widget to ask your questions during the webinar. And at the end of the webinar, this is very important, we're going to do a survey. And we look at the survey data. It really helps us kind of gauge, was the webinar effective or not, and what other topics would you like to see in webinars? So definitely at the end of the webinar, take a little time. It's about a 5-question survey. Please take that for us. So that's all the housekeeping items. Now let's move on to our presenter today, my friend Ryan Yackel. Ryan is a senior sales engineer here at QASymphony. In his role, he is really the customer voice for all of our products. Ryan comes to us from Macy's, where he managed testing on large enterprise initiatives there, and he is a certified Scrum Master. So with that, Ryan, I'm going to pass the baton to you to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for everybody for joining today. And I'm guessing you joined because you probably heard the words JIRA, and you probably heard another word called testing. That is pretty common because the way people use JIRA and traditionally how people go about using testing, lots of questions are around how do I basically use JIRA and how do I use it either for testing or how do I use something else to complement my JIRA process. So we're going to be talking about today a whole host of things. We're going to be talking about how JIRA is set up for testing. We're going to be talking about the pros and cons of strictly just using that for a test case management solution, and also the pros and cons of other things like integrations for JIRA, such as add-ons to the Atlassian Marketplace, then also external integrations that you can use with JIRA for test case management as well for a dedicated test case management solution. And then how you get to kind of get the best of both worlds, and we'll give you some recommendations on kind of the path to look down for your testing needs and also with JIRA. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We've got some poll questions we'd like for you to go ahead and answer. And one of the ones is around, because we have no idea actually if anyone here is either using JIRA or if they're maybe in the transition of using JIRA or currently evaluating JIRA. We'd love for you just to give us an idea so that we can kind of speak to some of these things as we're going through. So again, you may be know nothing about JIRA. You may have plans to move to JIRA but don't really know much about it. That will help us. So go ahead and please take that poll real quick. So it seems like the majority of people right now are about 66% of people are saying they've been using JIRA for the past several months or years. And some of them have just started JIRA. We got 2% of the people saying they don't really know what JIRA is, so that's fine. It's great to join a webinar, not really knowing what the topic is. So thanks for joining. Well, hopefully we'll be able to give you an idea of what JIRA is. But really what we want to be able to do is talk about how you're going to use testing along with JIRA. So those that may not know what JIRA is, do a quick Google search before we get going here. And the next thing we want to have you all answer real quick is how are you currently managing your test cases? And so you all could be using JIRA right now and just using maybe a custom issue type, which we'll talk about today. You all could be using a testing add-on for JIRA. Some of you may be using HP Quality Center. That's certainly a tool I used to use back in my Macy's and Systems and Technology age. And also some of you may be using Qtest, which is our product line for Agile testing integrated with JIRA. And some of you may not be using anything at all. So go ahead and fill that out real quick. All right. So, and this is actually pretty clear to what the market is showing us right now. We've got people right now giving us, they've got around 30% are using HP Quality Center, which is good because that's pretty typical of the industry that we're seeing. We're seeing as HP, as you know, is one of the market leaders in testing. So we'll talk about how at the end, kind of how our tool actually compares with HP. Then we're also seeing that a lot of people are using spreadsheets, and that's also true. Is one of my mentors used to say that the cheapest test case management solution out there is a free one. So if you've gotten Microsoft Office and you've got that kind of rocking and rolling, I'm guessing you all are probably going to be using spreadsheets. So as you all know, if you're using JIRA for the most part, looking to evaluate, the reason why you're doing that is because it's the #1 software development tool that's used by Agile teams, right? And as Agile adoption is continually to grow, people are going to be migrating more and more to JIRA software. That's only been increased by their IPO they've done recently. And then also just we see the massive wave of people just seeing the old legacy ALM type providers are not going to be able to fill their Agile testing needs. But one of the things that we always look at when it comes to using JIRA is we want to be able to know, well, how is JIRA actually set up for testing. If you've got it and you're using it, you may be really excited to use it, but at the same time, you may be wondering, well, how is it actually set up for testing? And the answer, and I don't want to, kind of knock on anybody here that is using JIRA. The answer is that JIRA is not set up for testing. That's kind of right out of the gate. If you notice, whenever you start a JIRA project, or let's say you start looking at trying how to incorporate a testing process in JIRA, if you just simply look at the issue types that normally come with a project setup, you'll notice right away, you'll ask a question, where is the test issue type? And we've got all different types of issues over here. We've got bug, we've got epic, we've got improvement. And even if you were to start a brand new project out of JIRA by a sample project, whether that's a Scrum or Kanban or even a basic software development, you'll notice that nothing is designated specifically for an issue type that is for a test. And we'll talk about this more and more today. Something you'll hear me reiterate is the fact that JIRA is not a test case management solution. You can customize it in certain ways to get some test case management process out of that. But really what we're doing here is we're trying to highlight that the issues that are inside of JIRA is really meant for issue tracking. You notice that everything in the workflow that is being built out inside of JIRA has an endpoint that's green, and it's called done. And what does that usually mean for testing? Testing is that it's not necessarily if you do one test, doesn't mean you're actually done with a particular test. So we'll see here in the demonstration in a couple different areas is that when you start trying to customize JIRA or customize certain issues there, you'll always be finding yourself moving toward done status when really you may want to use it for regression, or you may want to use the test case for different types of configurations or environment variables, things like that that aren't in this type of workflow that's always pushing something to a done status. So what does JIRA say for you? If you were to just Google right now and say, hey, what does JIRA say for test case management? You'll get all different types of information around it. Even on Atlassian's own Confluence page, they have an article that's on there, and although it's outdated, people actually still go on there and look at how to use a custom issue type or how to use JIRA for testing. And if you were to look just based off of what Atlassian says, they'll give you two recommendations, right? They'll say, okay, if you're going to use JIRA, go ahead and use JIRA software, and that's going to be great for manual testing, acceptance testing, and so on. If you're going to be using any type of automation, they've also got a product called Bamboo, and so run everything through Bamboo for your automation. However, and you'll notice here in my slides here, there's lots of colors in this slide deck to keep everybody kind of alert and awake. You'll notice that I put little yield signs or call to actions here in yellow to keep you aware of things. So let's say that JIRA does a really good job of just doing a straight manual test case. That may work maybe one time, or for brand new feature testing, it may work great because getting back to what we talked about earlier, if you're moving something to a done status, you may be done with that. So how are you going to do regression? How are you going to do session-based testing? How are you going to reuse these objects across projects, assign them to multiple ticket items, and show that coverage? The same thing is if you are not using Bamboo and you're using something like Jenkins or TeamCity or other automation frameworks that maybe aren't so focused on CI, then Bamboo is only going to help out for the people that are using it. So just things to keep in mind as we're walking through here. So in the different options that we have for setting up JIRA for test case management, we're going to go with the first one and talk about that first, which is your option A is to customize your JIRA issues. And you can do that multiple ways. The first way to do that would be to come in and actually add in an issue type that is a test case type. And so as you all know, you all can customize and create any type of issue that you want to inside of JIRA. And for this example, I'm just saying, yeah, we're going to go ahead and add this in as a test case type here. And I've added in, based off of what they recommend for Atlassian, if you look through that, they'll recommend you want to add in steps to complete and expected outcomes. You see there down below on the issue field that you're seeing there. But you'll also notice that they're all grouped together, which we'll get to here in a minute of how add-ons and other tools can help out with that. So you're basically adding in steps to complete, expected outcomes for those. And then what you're going to do is make that test case the parent issue of the testing that you're doing. And what that allows you to do is it allows the test case to be the parent issue. And whenever you want to run, let's say, an execution of that test case, what Atlassian says is you want to be able to create a subtask that would be the test run. So if you think about how JIRA is set up right now, you've got a test case. You would just simply add in a subtask that's labeled as a test run. That's another custom issue type you can create. And then on that test run, you could put in the actual outcomes, the affected versions, the results of that, and also the assignee who's actually running that. But the problem with this is that if you do create a parent type issue ID, that's a test case, and you do, let's say, run a test run as a subtask, well, what if you want to rerun that test execution? Well, what Atlassian says is, well, you just want to add more test runs as subtasks. And if you add a new version that you're testing this test case in, you would just assign that at the subtask level. So that kind of brings up some questions around, well, if you're only getting the latest subtask status for each of your test runs, you're going to have to add in a subtask every single time that you want to log the history of that test case that's run. The other thing is that how are you going to reuse the subtask? We talk about later is being able to reuse test runs and logs of those test runs and have visibility into those. How are you going to, if you want to group a bunch of test runs in different configurations and show in a coverage report, how are you going to do that if they're all just assigned underneath that one parent issue? The next way that we talk about this is say, you know what? Let's just forget about the test case issue type. And if you look in chat boards and forums, you'll see us all over the place, and you'll see a lot of people struggle with how to actually add in testing a part of their JIRA workflow. And what they say is, well, you know what? I'll just stick with the user story. And so the next option would be is you have a user story. You don't create that parent issue that's a test case type. You have that user story and you say, okay, this user story needs to get to done status. So I'm going to add in, when I add in a user story, I'm going to add in a subtask that actually acts as the test case or test run that refers back to that user story. You may be in an organization that says, yeah, everything we do is on the user story. So we'll track our subtasks against this. If all the subtasks are passing, then the user story is ready to go into production, right? Well, we have the same problems, right? Because the same problem would occur is that the subtask is actually acting as the test case and also the test run. So if you're ever going to want to be able to use the subtask again, in let's say a regression cycle, or you want to be able to use this as maybe linked to another user story, these are some of the complicated issues you're going to run into, is what happens when the user story is moved to that done status. It would make sense from a JIRA workflow that if issues are all moving to done, then when it gets to done, you would just simply close that out. But if you have to close, or if you have to then reopen the subtask and then convert it to maybe a test case template or a test case type, that's going to be a lot of maintenance and overhead when you're actually trying to use subtasks against user stories. The other thing is if you want to align, if you've got multiple test cases they're linking to multiple user stories for test case coverage, these are also issues you're going to run into when you try to use this type of workflow for running test cases without using anything outside of what comes standard with JIRA. So some pros and cons of using JIRA, right? If you're not going to really look at the next tools, if you are thinking right now, well, I'm going to use JIRA no matter what, and I don't really care to learn about maybe some add-ons or external tools, well, you've got some good things going for you. You can create issue types all day long. You can use your existing workflows in there. JIRA comes with some great dashboard reporting. You can use that, and it's really good for manual execution, right? That one-time manual execution to get something to done. But this is something that's very important, and this is something that Atlassian also calls out. That little bold line there that says no testing specific functionality is something that Atlassian calls out and even admits and says, listen, we have no direct specific testing functionality. So being able to group testing cycles and test execution and being able to do configurations and version control, all these different types of things that you would assume to do normally with test case execution and environment execution isn't something that they really support. And so when we think about these things, we also want to be thinking about is JIRA really built for testing, or does this just seem like we are forcing the issue? And there's no pun intended there. Everything is an issue in JIRA, but really, are we really forcing this issue? Are we really trying to create testing where a tool like JIRA isn't necessarily built for testing. There's also questions around, being able to have a test case coverage report that talks about manual execution, automation execution, maybe session-based execution. Then the obvious ones around traceability reporting between these issues and test case coverage, right? And then, of course, we've talked about earlier just the regression aspect of this. If you want to be able to use some of these test cases and be able to run these executions more than one time, having that history, there's going to be a lot of duplication of your effort within JIRA for this because it's not specifically built for that type of testing within the tool. So we're going to take a time out here and just ask another poll question. And this is, I've been kind of talking about this all along, but I've kind of highlighted some areas of concern, which are you're going to want to be able to reuse and centralize your testing. So I asked that, and hopefully we're going to get extremely important here, but for your teams right now, how important it is for you to have the ability to reuse and centralize those test executions. And of course, everyone says, yes, this is very important for us, or even extremely important for us. Nobody has even told us that it's not important at all. So we understand it's very important, right? And this is where we start talking about, okay, well, what can we do then? Because we've made the transition to JIRA. We really like it for issue tracking. Our developers love it. Well, how was our test team really going to get a whole lot of value out of JIRA then? We're here to help you with that. We want to talk about some other ways to go about doing that. So now you've got option B, which are the integrations that go into JIRA. And there's really two types of integrations. You've got the add-ons, which are internal integrations. So that means that they actually live inside your JIRA application, whether that's JIRA Cloud or JIRA Server. And those add-ons try to extend some of that test case functionality. The other is a dedicated test case management solution. So I actually saw on the line there, some people are using Qtest, some people are using HP. Those would be dedicated test case management solutions. Those are using, so they use a plug-in to JIRA or add-ons. You would fall into the first category. So we'll have something for both people today and talk about what add-on would be good for you or what dedicated solution would be good for you and give you some options for that. So the add-ons that are in the marketplace, these may be familiar to you. We're only going to highlight a couple of these today, and I'm only going to talk about some of the main features and also some of the main limitations that they have. You have X-Ray for JIRA, you have Zephyr for JIRA. Those are very popular for manual test execution. X-Ray also extends a little bit functionality in terms of being able to do BDD type testing as well. And then we also have those that are really focused on BDD and TDD and ADD type testing. We have Behave Pro and Qtest Scenario. So both of those products there are really kind of niche plugins, whereas Zephyr and X-Ray try to kind of do everything that you can within test case management inside of JIRA. Qtest Scenario and Behave Pro, they really are just focused on that BDD type testing and ATD type testing for those smaller teams, and possibly those are embracing more of an Agile 2.0 space within inside of JIRA. So how do these add-ons extend the functionality that we really desire for? The first thing the add-ons do, and this is actually the X-Ray plugin that you're seeing here, you'll notice that as soon as I show this little snapshot here, you'll see that they automatically create a test issue type. And you can notice down below, you also are seeing that, that you've got test case steps as well that are added into that test issue type. So with an add-on, what it does is, previously we talked about if you create your own issue type, you have to add in a bulk section where it says your steps to complete and then also your expected outcomes. And really what happens there is that you have these blocks of the testing that you have to do all at once. You can't really put in line by line maybe where the step failed, where it was executed, and what was the actual execution of that. And so this is, again, the X-Ray plugin or an add-on. They help with that. They add in a part of their plugin framework that they've integrated with JIRA, the ability to add steps, add data to that, and also add expected results, so you can get a little more of a granularity. So it really does solve that issue that we talked about earlier for creating that custom test issue type. The next thing is that if you were to use an add-on that's like Qtest Scenario or like Behave Pro, you're really kind of full-blown into BDD, and you're really trying to do given when then type testing scenarios. and feature files. And what that is what QAScenario actually does is it allows you to import your .feature files along with your scenarios in as issue types. And so what we're not doing is just creating a standard issue type, which is typical of a test case, which is you have steps that are passing or they're failing, or they've got expected results, or steps to reproduce, steps to description steps, and also the expected results of those. What we're doing here is we're adding in the reconcile test scripting language in the scenario piece, where you can actually create .feature files. You can also create scenario files that attach those .feature files within inside of JIRA. So this also extends into maybe adding these to a user story. So if you're really kind of using this type of testing, then using something like Behave Probe or QAScenario is another option for you. And then the other thing that the testing add-ons and the plugins are doing is they're trying to bring together the groups of the testing that's going on. So you can see right away that this is actually from Zephyr for JIRA. So what they've done is they've been able to pull in all of the test cases they have and add them into cycles or into suites. And what you're seeing here is that they've only got one level here. They've got a functionality test cycle. They've got some ad hoc testing cycles, but they are grouping these into groups of testing that's going on. And so this is actually a view inside of JIRA that sees that. And then you can also see the latest execution result of those test cases that are created also within the grouping of the add-on that you're seeing here. So that's another thing that the plugins are trying to do, is that we talked about earlier, just having a user story or having an issue type, adding subtasks to that. Well, you're not really going to be able to really show visibility to the grouping of the test executions without a plugin or add-on that's like this. One thing I'll just point out is that we'll talk about this as we get into more of the dedicated test case management solutions, but you're still going to be a little bit strapped in terms of what you can and can't do with your test execution, because the plugins are also a little bit limited into the JIRA infrastructure they're building into. And one of those is just the way that you go about executing them. It's a little bit more of a manual process than some of the more dedicated test case management solutions. We'll talk about that earlier. I just want to highlight that and show you the center there. So what are some, when you get to execution of these plugins, what are some of the main things that I want to make you aware of? One of the things that I think that far too often people don't understand in a lot of these plugins is that, one, they're project limited, which means is that if you look about how you can have multiple issues in multiple projects, and if you look on JIRA, they'll tell you, you have to move the project, or you have to clone the existing existing issue into another project to actually use it. So everything that you're doing within inside of these plugins is actually limited directly to that particular project. The other thing is that there's also some version limitation when you're actually creating the test case. And so what usually happens is and we hear this a lot when it comes to plugins, is that if you have if you create an issue and you go to run the issue, well, all the run is just a duplication of that test case. And so let's say I had 5 steps in the test case I created, and I had that same test case in a cycle to be ran, and I added a 6th step or even a 7th step. What occurs is that it'll automatically push that data over into the running of those into a cycle, and so you can't really keep the versions of that. With Qtest and with some other tools that are out there, you can actually keep track of all the versions of the test case and run past versions of the test case when you go to execute. And so what we're really showing you here is that it's kind of a one-to-one in terms of the version history of that test case execution. The other thing is that, again, just to reiterate this, is that when you're using an add-on, a test case equals a JIRA issue. Now, it may not appear that way. You may have a different icon, or you may, just because it says a test case, you may think that, but really, they are using the infrastructure of JIRA. This goes the same way with QTest scenario as well, is that there's limitations that are going to encompass if you have a test case that's basically being translated into a JIRA issue. So always be thinking about, as you're going through and evaluating some of these add-ons, is that if there's some limitation that you're seeing in JIRA that you don't want for a test case, maybe it's something that you can deal with for maybe a different issue type or a different workflow, make sure it's something that you're going to be okay with when you're actually evaluating some of these add-ons. So the pros and cons of the add-ons, it's a very, the look and feel is very similar to JIRA. And for those that love JIRA's flat infrastructure, that flat design, then this is going to be great for them. The other thing is that they can utilize the dashboards that are inside of JIRA, along with utilizing the marketplace model for pricing as well. So it's very much you go online, you can buy it, and you're good to go. The other thing is they're adding test-specific functionality in there, like we talked about adding test suites, and we talked about being able to add test steps and the actual results of that. That's something that add-ons are really doing. And also they specialize in certain testing as well, like BDD type testing, like Behave Pro and QTest scenario, some of those tools. But the cons of the add-ons is also something that can really limit. So one of the things is that there's either zero or limited availability to reuse test cycles. And you may be able to clone a test cycle, or you may have to move test cases into maybe an ad hoc test cycle that's not really attached to a release. These are things you'll find out as you're using these add-ons, is that, boy, why you may not be totally constrained to copying and reusing these test cycles, you may find it very hard to do, or maybe have a limited availability to do that. The other thing is there's no logical folder structures, and that's a huge thing, especially people on the line that are using HP Quality Center and they're coming over and they're trying to use a tool like JIRA, and HP, number one, doesn't even have a real-time integration with JIRA, which we'll talk about later on. They're having a really hard time trying to kind of communicate what they're seeing inside of their tool and then what the way JIRA is actually set up. So the logical folder structure is really something that is a hindrance to them. The other thing is that you'll have lots of test case duplication, especially if you're having to copy and paste your test cases across projects. There's really, at times, there could be no source record of what's actually going on. We talked about also the ability not to share test cases across projects. I was actually, and this gets in terms of like scaling, I was actually on one of the webinars for one of the plugins, just kind of listening in on what they had to say, and one of the emails we got back from one of the questions is that, if you have thousands of test cases, then you may want to evaluate our non-plugin version. That was our vendor had said that, because they realized that their plugin, if you need a logical folder structure and need a good way to house your test cases, well, then the plugin's really not going to work for you, and especially if you have over 1,000 test cases, that may not work as well either. So just kind of reiterate some of the high points here, which is that you've got some inherited limitations of the JIRA infrastructure. And again, that's not to say that the JIRA infrastructure isn't good. It's just that it's built for issue tracking. And so if you've got an issue tracking infrastructure that's being pushed into test case management, then you're going to have some issues with that. What about sharing test cases and test steps with multiple projects? I know that some people on the line really like to, I've probably heard the term of being able to call test cases of source test executions into other test cases. That's, again, something that you can't do within plugins. Being able to run a same test with different variables, maybe configurations, parameters, these types of things, again, you're going to have to duplicate a lot of the effort because these plugins don't necessarily have those type of enterprise type tools that you're going to be looking into. And then also be thinking about how your team is going to scale once you get inside JIRA. If you've got thousands of test cases and you're looking to push all of those into JIRA right away, that may be an issue. You may want to look at something else. So the next question I want to ask is just, how efficient is your test case management process today? And the reason I'm asking that is because we're about to start talking about more dedicated type test case management process tools. So some of you may be saying, yeah, we're very efficient. We're kind of rocking and rolling all the time. Or it may be that it's not very efficient because you do have JIRA in place and you've got a tool that maybe is disconnected from that. So we got the somewhat efficient or not very efficient is kind of our main polling here. That's good. I mean, I totally understand. Even when I was at Macy's and other test case or other projects, even working at CGI as a consultant, we struggle to be very efficient, right? And that's just all software development teams and all testing teams that do that, right? But it may be that you're somewhat efficient or not very efficient because you may be using the wrong tool, and so, or you may be using just JIRA as a standalone, or you may be using an add-on, or you may be using a tool that's not connected with JIRA at all. So the next slew of external test case management tools that JIRA's got these on their website as well, or on the Atlassian page to kind of look into. These are some of the tools that are out there that are really focused on testing. They've been in the testing world for a while, and there is some level of integration. SmartBear, HP, QASymphony, all these tools are tools that are a part of what we would consider dedicated test case management solutions. The same with Qtest and Tricentis. Zephyr, they're even mentioning down here, they have an enterprise test case management solution. It's called Zephyr Enterprise. So they've also got a plug-in and enterprise solutions that you can look at when you're also evaluating that. But what these tools try to do is bring more of testing-specific functionality to your testing process without having for you to give up that as a testing organization. So what are some of the things that they really strive in? And one of the main ones is that they are a great way to consolidate all of your automated and manual execution. A lot of the plugins that you're seeing really focus on just manual execution, or they're specific to BDD and TDD. But what about maybe you're doing Selenium automation, or maybe you're doing maybe a custom framework that you have? You're going to want to be able to consolidate all your manual execution and your automated execution in a way that will be able to also communicate with JIRA. We'll get to that kind of at the end, how these tools do that. The other thing that external test case managers do amazingly well, and this is for a lot of them that are out there, is that there's an enhanced execution setup and reuse of all the executions that are going on. And so I showed you an example of one of the plugins was able to group their testing into, let's say, into cycles, right? But what they can't do is have testing cycles inside cycles, or maybe you want to have a cycle that has test suite execution. That's one of the main things we hear is that, well, how do I group my testing into suites that represent the cycles of the testing that I want, which roll up into releases, right? I mean, that's really, you're talking about really needing to scale your organization. It's not as simple, hey, I've got 2 people that I need to go off and test something, and then we're going to push it out into production, right? Maybe you've got offshore teams as well that you need to monitor. This is where the enhanced setup execution is going to be helpful for your execution. And also, you've got test run configuration, parameters, these types of things that help out with the ongoing execution of a test run or a set of test runs. So not having to go back to the source record and always copy and change the test case. You can simply use the test case that you have and divvy it out into a run, the configuration on that run. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like in a diagram in this next slide here. Last thing I'll just point out is that what these testing tools do is that they say, we're going to be the source record of all the testing, but then what I want to be able to do is show and display the execution logs or the execution of my testing clearly inside of JIRA. And so this is actually a plugin that is basically an adapter that pulls over some of the executions that's going on from your test case management tool and pushes them over onto a JIRA issue. So you're seeing the entire history of the execution actually on the ticket. You're not just seeing the latest execution of that. You can see the entire history of that to learn kind of how that test case is performing throughout that testing phase. And so how also can these external tools really help out with the different projects you may have inside JIRA or even projects you have within the own tool? The best ones do this is that if you've got projects, you don't want to just isolate the testing only to one project. And so what you can do is you can have a test case that's shared with multiple projects, and the test case can either live in they can either be duplicates inside the project, or you can have a source record of that test case that all these projects are sharing from. And so when you're actually using the test case, it's being versioned along the way, and it's being ran, what you're seeing is that the version goes along with the test run, and then every time it's ran, you have test logs of that version. And so whatever you need to find out, okay, I ran this test case, why did it fail? These types of test case management solutions are going to be able to show you that right away, because what they're able to do is store all of the data from their executions into test logs of the test run. You know, for example, I know in Qtest you can have multiple test runs of the same test case, and that same and multiple test runs could have different configurations, different environment setups, different results, and different assignees to those, but they could all be coming from the same test case, but with different versions of that test case. So it really allows you to leverage the test case as that template that you want, instead of having to duplicate it over and over and over again, and be able to have this type of a run and log information when you're actually going through the testing. And so what are the pros and then cons of an external test case management solution? Well, the pros are, it's a fully dedicated test case management tool, right? You've got a lot of the enterprise features, whether you're doing configuration manager, you've got CI integrations with Jenkins and Bamboo, not just limited just to Bamboo. You've got automated testing support. You've also got test case repositories that are customized based off of templates, and also being able to reuse and reuse and object sharing across those different projects. But one of the things that people instantly think about, and I'm sure the people that are using HP or using some of the other synchronization tools are thinking about right now, is that there's constant database synchronizations between your TCM and JIRA for your source record. The other thing you're having to do is do artifact mapping for permissions. You may have browser restrictions. For example, I know HP has Internet Explorer only, and it's maybe not be fully integrated with JIRA. So I'd be curious to kind of understand. I wish we had a poll for this, but out of all the people that are using HP or some of these other tools that are out there, maybe Borland or QAComplete, I'd like to know if there's actually a real integration that's going on there, or is it a manual integration that's going on. And then the last one is that there's really there's a lot of open source friendliness is really something that varies between those. And so if you're thinking about, what are some of the cautions that you may look at for test case management, one of the things I would say is that you want, first of all, is to make sure you have these enterprise features without sacrificing any real-time integration. So we'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing is does your team have a wide range of testing methodologies? If you're all doing manual testing and you're on a small team and there's really no push for automation, then maybe a plugin or just using JIRA standalone may work for you. The other thing is your test strategy warranted of an enterprise testing tool? Would it be something that you all need, or maybe you're going to need in the future, or is it something that would be a nice to have? And one of the things that here at QASymphony that we like to do is, when we like to present our software or to show how we can get the best of both worlds between an enterprise tool and your JIRA integration, is to highlight the fact that our integration is not based off of a scheduled synchronization. We have what's called best on practices built on JIRA's best practices of using their webhooks, and so you'll see here in the left side, you see a lot of confusion there, and that's by design. That's typically what a lot of these synchronization tools look like, which is you have to map your entire schema from your TCM to your JIRA schema. And what you're doing is you're constantly pulling the data, you're constantly using a lot of the resources to do that, and with Qtest, we don't do any of that. We don't have any of this that goes on in our tool. We have is a straight mapping of, I want to connect this project that I'm testing on into a JIRA project here, and I want to map these particular JIRA issues, whether they're user stories, they're epics, they're subtests, I want to map and show test case coverage against those. And the end result is that, and I know some of you probably joined the call here thinking about, how can you keep your developers happy in JIRA, and how can you keep your testers also happy? And that's how our integration works, is that with JIRA, what you have is you've got everyone that's a BA or somebody that's maybe a developer, they love staying inside JIRA, right? and they don't want to have to maybe go over to another TCM to enter a defect or look at a test case or whatever. With QTest, what we do is we say, keep doing all of your updates inside of JIRA, but only pull over, using the webhook integration, only pull over the issues that you care about into our tool where you can create test cases, test runs, and then map those to the requirements that you have mapped over from JIRA. And then when you execute those runs, you just push the defect back out into JIRA where the developer can then interact with the defect and actually start working on the resolution of that. So what happens is that you've got a developer, you've got the BA, they're all happy inside JIRA because they can stay there. They don't have to come to our tool to see everything. They can see the execution results on that. They can update the defects on the JIRA side. And on QTest, you have testers that are also happy as well because they've got those enterprise-type features that are missing from a lot of the traditional plugins that are out there. So always keeping JIRA your source of record, using QTest for those enterprise testing features is going to get you to that type of happiness for both worlds, where you've got developers happy in JIRA and you've got testers happy in QTest. And the last thing we'll just kind of highlight here is just the things that you want out of a integration with an external tool. With the synchronization by a lot of the other TCMs, you've got delays, and you've also got poor performance with the APIs constantly maybe going in between JIRA to figure out what's been updated. The other thing is that you could have data corruption, so these scheduled syncs could cause data collisions, which could lead to duplicated issues or even an overhaul of database corruption. It's costly overhead, and that's a big one if you think about a manager who's got to control a synchronization client. And this is also a lot of other tools you can look at that are outside in the marketplace. If you just Google, ALM synchronization tools or object synchronization tools, you see a lot of them. And this is what they do. They say, yeah, we want to be able to sync the data back and forth, but you're going to have to maintain all of that. So if anything changes on one tool, you're going to have to change it in another tool. And if you think about all the different projects you have, all the different issues you're mapping, that's going to be a huge issue when it comes to maintaining that. And the benefits, of course, is that by not using a synchronization tool and having our product actually being built on best practices that refer to the JIRA's Atlassian best practice of using their webhooks, you've got direct submission over into JIRA for defects. You've got browser automation that uses that for test execution. You've also got some embedded reporting, but then also you've got the accurate data because you always have JIRA as your source record for user stories and defects when you're tracking them through the entire software development lifecycle. So we've just put together kind of at the end here, we're going to take some questions. We always want to leave about 10 minutes or so left for questions, but at the end of this, we want to be able to give you some recommendations, which is, if you've got a team that's small or very small to small, you're really doing manual regression or you're doing manual testing but no regression, you may want to just look at the first option we talked about, which is just using JIRA. And that may be perfect for you. You can build out your custom issue types, enter in your data, and then also you could also continue using those particular spreadsheets if you're using spreadsheets on the site or Google Docs or something like that. If you're small to medium and you're doing BD and manual type testing, then I'd recommend looking at QTest Scenario, Behave Pro, X-Ray. They're great for that. And then also teams are using manual testing with some automation that are small to medium. You may want to look at QTest and also Zephyr for JIRA. There's a couple other ones as well that are out there, but those are some of the ones I'd recommend for small SMB. Then you start scaling up into the medium to large to enterprise customers that are really more focused on manual exploratory testing, looking at CI and automation. I look at QTest, I look at Zephyr Enterprise, and of course there's HPQC and Borland. I'd only recommend those if you're possibly maybe you're not sure about JIRA or maybe you're looking to move off it. If you want to stick in those types of tools, because those tools do not have a type of real-time integration that would help out with a lot of the issues that we see constantly with those external test case management tools and integrating with JIRA for your source record. Okay, so that kind of ends our seminar or our webinar here. Again, there is so much that we could have talked about today. we want to give a flyover of just your options that are out there. This is by no means was a all-inclusive testing relating to JIRA webinar. So hopefully we've got a lot of good feedback from you all, and we'll be able to ask you more and get some more of these webinars underway in the next couple months, or next month.
Thanks, Ryan. So a couple items, there are a lot of questions that came in during the webinar, so we'll try to cover those. We had one point on that the link for the March 24th webinar wasn't working. That should be fixed now, so if anyone wants to register for that webinar and had trouble before, just go in the widget on the right for that webinar and you could register. A lot of questions on, can I get these slides, on-demand viewing? The answer is these slides will be posted to our SlideShare page. These slides will be available on demand to watch the webinar again. Also, I'd encourage you to check out the QASymphony blog tomorrow. We'll have a recap of the webinar that Ryan will write up, and we may answer some of the questions we don't get to in the Q&A. We'll have the slides there, so you could just visit our website, QASymphony.com, tomorrow to the blog section, and you'll get the information. So Ryan, we got a lot of questions. First one came in. We'll answer one from Twitter. Any add-ons to create parameterized test cases?
None that I know of. So that's a one that we hear a lot. The same goes with test run configurations. I'm not aware of any. I know that unless they come out with this tomorrow, I believe one of the main add-ons that's on the marketplace is Zephyr for JIRA. I know they don't do that, and so that's a big one that I know that a lot of people ask about. But I'm not aware of any that do that.
Okay. Another question comes from Twitter. Very interested in learning about requirements to test case traceability coverage reports. Does anyone offer those kind of reports?
There are, yeah. So you've got, X-Ray does that. Zephyr for JIRA for add-on does that. QTest, of course. We've got extensive traceability coverage for that. One thing to keep in mind as you're going through and looking at those traceability reports is how in-depth that you're seeing. Some may stop with just you've got test cases that are covering this, but they don't give you the execution results of that. You've got some that won't give out all the defects that refer to the test executions, only just the latest execution. So just make sure as you're going through and evaluating some of those, you're just making sure you go through all those traceability reports. But the ones we mentioned today, there is a level of traceability reports that they do offer.
Great. A couple questions came in on some people on the cloud version of JIRA, some people on-premise, and do you have to approach your tool selection differently if you're cloud versus on-prem?
Not for QTest, but for add-ons, yes, because I know the add-on market, just so you all know, to give it a little background of kind of what happened with the JIRA marketplace, is that a lot of these add-ons were built for JIRA Server, and some of them are only still for JIRA Server. The other thing you want to keep in mind, and this is why, is because JIRA Cloud has only been only gotten bigger and better in the last couple of years or so. I think maybe it was even last year. And the last year is making a major push to get more and more people on the cloud. The add-ons that you're looking at may only be for server only. And the other thing to keep in mind is if an add-on has gone from server to cloud, you better make sure that they offer the same functionality, because what's happened is we've seen is that some of these add-ons, they're all the way up to like version 3 or 4 for server, but their cloud version's only at 2. And that's because they didn't introduce a cloud version until much later in the game. So something you all want to keep track of that. With our solution with QTest, we actually did the opposite. So we actually went cloud first and then did an on-premise offering later. So that was kind of a better way to organize that.
Great. A lot of questions came in on open source tools and how to think about open source tools versus add-ons versus some of the more enterprise software tools?
Yeah, so, an open source tool one is the open source tool that we always talk about, right, is just straight up Google Docs or, of course, I know that Excel is kind of paid, but, Microsoft Office if you have that. But other tools like, let's say, like TestLink is another tool that's out there. The problem with these open source tools, though, is that there's really no support around them. And so they're kind of at the whim of kind of doing whatever they want. There's no real customer dedicated to those, especially in the test case management world. I think there's a lot better community around like Cucumber or Selenium that really has great ties into other different avenues than just like a test case management solution. So I know TestLink is one of those that I hear of a lot that's open source. But the other thing I would just make sure is that you test out the integration of the open source tool, because some maybe only be integrated with JIRA at the bug tracking level. Some may only be connected at the requirement tracking level. So you want to be able to make sure the integration that you're testing out is something that you're going to be able to live with an open source tool.
I had a question about two tools that you didn't mention, TFS and TestRail, and
yeah.
where would you bucket those and everything you described?
Yeah, so TFS I would say is more of a TFS is more of a of course the testing part of that is actually called MTM, so Microsoft Test Case Manager. They're along the lines of HP, Borland. We also see them in certain avenues over here at QTest. They're more of, I would say, that when people are playing catch up, and what I mean by that is, HP, TFS, Borland, all these tools, they were built to be an entire exclusive tool, right? They are built for, hey, I want to you do all my management inside of this, requirements, releasing, defects, all of that. And what happened was they see a lot of people moving to JIRA, so they've had to build integrations on top of their existing functionality. So they're kind of playing catch up and trying not to lose people to people that are actually going over to use JIRA. TFS also uses a similar sync tool that HP does. It's very cumbersome, and it's not something that's kind of manageable. TestRail is a tool that also integrates with JIRA. They don't use a sync method. They use a different way of doing it. We've heard some good things about TestRail. They're also kind of limited in their requirements aspect on the JIRA side, though. They only really have a good, or in our opinion, they only have a good integration at the defect level. But the issues they come around is that although it's a good product, a lot of the enterprise tools or enterprise features that you may want, like for example, having a supported Jenkins and Bamboo integration. They've got an open source community that supports that, so they don't have a direct support for that like QTest does or like we do. So there's a couple quirky things here and there, but both products, again, something both of you all need to check out. One I would say is more on the legacy end. The other is more on the new modern test case management that's out there.
Then another question on metrics and reports and what tools out there provide the best reports, and are you viewing reports in JIRA or you're reviewing reports in some of the external software tools?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both, right? And especially if you're using JIRA Server, you've got all these different plugins that you could use for Confluence to hit a database directly. If you're going to be looking at something like a MySQL Confluence plugin, that's something you could really use for reporting if you want to get really in-depth and look into that. The other thing is that if you're using your system of record for, let's say, release planning or defect tracking or whatever, then I would always recommend trying to use the source record for that reporting. So for defects, for example, instead of querying defects from your test case management solution, query them inside JIRA. JIRA's got all the dashboards you probably need for defect tracking and so on. But if you're looking for more traceability, then you may want to use a combination that would include some of those together.
Great. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so I want to thank everyone for joining us. And very important, I'm going to stop the webinar in a second, but please take the survey. Let us know what you think. And once again, we had a lot of people on this webinar, a lot of questions. We're going to try to answer the questions after the webinar. So check our blog for complete Q&A if you want the slides. But again, thank you everybody for coming out and joining us, and we hope to see you on March 24th. And thank you, Ryan Yackel, for a great webinar. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.